In today's photo deconstruction, I'm going to show you how to make a vibrant, colorful fashion image using nothing more than creative white balance. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and I love putting color in my images in so many different ways. Colorful backgrounds, colorful wardrobe, colorful hair and makeup, colorful light. But one of the ways that I creatively add color to my images, I think, isn't used by many photographers, and that is creative use of white balance and tint. So what I mean by that is a lot of times I'll take an image that maybe doesn't really have any gels or colorful light, but then I play around with the white balance and the tint when I'm processing my raw, and I completely transform a shot. And so that's what I would like to show you as I do the photo deconstruction of this fashion shoot. So let's take a look first at the final results, then I'll show you the lighting, and then we'll take a look at the post-processing. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm referring to really colorful imagery that wasn't done with colored light. It looks like it would be, right? How else could I achieve these really saturated colors? Well, that is what I'm going to show you today. So first, let's take a look behind the scenes so I can break down the lighting and the setup. All right, let's begin with the background and the scene. In this shot, I'm using a Savage Universal Fashion Gray. Now, the reason I wanted to use a gray background is I knew that it would be really easy to shift the color because it will begin neutral, but as I make the white balance warmer or cooler or add more magenta tint or green tint, I'm going to be able to really adjust the color of that background. So that's why I started with a neutral background. Next up, let's look at our main light. The main light is over on the left-hand side of the frame, and it is a ProPhoto D2 with the Westcott Optical Spot. This is the light modifier that I created in collaboration with Westcott. This modifier has a lens in front of it that allows you to put gobos or different shapes in between the lens and the subject and then create little slices of light. Actually, built into the modifier are these leaves or shutters, so I can close or open them to create slices of light, and that's what I've done in this instance. I've created a slice of light down the left-hand side of the subject. So that is my main light source on the left-hand side of the frame. Now, by the way, this modifier comes with a kit lens, and that kit lens is fantastic because it's super sharp, it has no chromatic aberrations, and it's great for focusing light, especially for close-up shots and mid-length shots. However, when I'm lighting a subject full length, I need a little bit more spread of light. And that is why we created this modifier to allow you to switch out the lenses. It actually has a mount for EF lenses. And that's what you'll see in the notes here that I was actually using a 24 to 70 2.8 lens because that allows me to light the subject from head to toe. Now, in the description, I've also put a link to frequently asked questions and a little bit more information about this optical spot if you'd like to learn more. All right, so that is our first light to the left-hand side of the frame. And then I've added a second strobe. It is a ProPhoto D2, but this time it has a large umbrella with diffusion. This is going to lift up the shadows in the scene and give overall illumination. So think of it this way. That light on the left-hand side is giving a slice of light down the subject's face, but then everything else would go to shadow. So then the large umbrella with diffusion is what fills in those shadows. So those are the two main lights in the shot. That being said, there's technically one more light in the scene. And if you look, there's no other strobes, there's no other constant lights. But it has to do with my camera settings. So although fundamentally this shot is creative because of the white balance, there's actually a creative in-camera technique that I was practicing here. So take a look at this. I was shooting with the Canon R5 and the Canon RF 24 to 105 lens. We're shooting at f4, ISO 640, but here's the magic of the equation. Look at my shutter speed. My shutter speed is 1/4 of a second, meaning it is a very, very, very slow shutter speed. And this is not something that you would normally do when you're shooting in the studio. Because when you shoot such a slow shutter speed, it begins to allow in ambient light, basically any of the constant light. So at such a slow shutter speed, instead of shooting at your camera sync speed, you're going to start to pick up light from the modeling lights or light overhead or light coming in from the windows. And that is exactly what I did on this shot on purpose. So by shooting at 1/4 of a second, I allowed some ambient light to come in. So it would light a little bit on her hair, a little bit more in the environment. And then I purposefully moved my camera. So when you look at the final image, you can see that there's kind of blurs around the edges. There's kind of streaks and a little bit of shake. That's on purpose. And that was achieved by the slow shutter speed. So that is technically like a third light source in the scene. So I have two strobes, and then the slow shutter speed allows some of the ambient light to register. So let's actually take a look at what I captured versus how it ended up in post. So this was the final shot. Bright purple background. She has blue tint to her face and to her dress. She's got that beautiful yellow orange in the hair. But where did it start out? So this is the raw file with 0 adjustments. And I'm shooting at a flash white balance in this shot. So you can see that maybe there's a little bit more warmth perhaps on her hair, and maybe her skin appears a little bit cooler, but there's pretty much no color in this scene. By the way, before we take a look at my processing, you see that? See the haze around the edge of the clothing, and a little bit of the blur in the hair. That is caused by the long shutter speed. Okay, so what I did is I then went in and I increased the contrast, like full amount. Then I adjusted the white balance back and forth between warm and cool, and I ended up going really cool. And then I adjusted the tint between green and magenta. And you can do this all in camera raw. I was doing this in Capture 1. So as I'm playing around with the white balance. From there, I went in and I did a little bit of color grading, playing around by adding a little bit of cyan to the highlights, adding even more magenta to the shadows. You can do this in Lightroom as well. So after all of those changes, contrast, tint, white balance, color grade to the highlights and shadows, this is what it looked like with 0 Photoshop. And it is a drastically different image, and it is super colorful and has a ton of pop. It makes it almost a little bit dreamlike, almost a little bit cartoon. And so from here, I do an analysis of what I find distracting in the image, things that I may want to improve. So first of all, I think a little bit of that main light, the slice of light that was hitting down the center of her body, and you can kind of see it here, right? It goes a slice down to here on her dress and basically the middle of her torso. I think a little bit of that light spilled on the background, and I find this to be distracting. There's a little bit of texture on the background that showed up, especially when I popped the contrast, so I'd like to smooth that out a little. When I moved the camera, I zoomed and moved it a little bit, you can see that a little bit of her eyes and forehead blurred and extended up into her hairline. So I think I will fill that in, because I don't think that that's adding anything interesting to the shot. And then potentially a little bit of the fabric over here on the right-hand side of the frame, I don't think is really giving a nice clean silhouette to the subject's frame, so I'll likely get rid of that as well. So here's the original. Here's what I did with my camera raw adjustments, and then here's what I did in Photoshop. You'll also notice that I did a vignette. I darkened down the edges of the frame just to bring the attention back to the subject, because there was so much purple around her. I didn't want that saturated color to pull your eye away. So again, cleaned up the frame, filled in that part where the forehead was extending, and cleaned up a little bit of the background. And this is where we started. So that's why I wanted to take you behind the scenes of kind of how I think about post-processing, both white balance and tint and my color grading, because sometimes an image that has no color at all can be completely transformed. And so it's a good creative exercise to re-envision how you can add extra life to a photograph that maybe otherwise wasn't exactly inspiring you in the moment, but there's a little bit of room to play around in post-processing. Now, before I wrap this up, I did want to show you one other thing. So I was constantly experimenting during this shoot, moving my camera, trying different techniques, and I was shooting tethered and messing around with the white balance. But I also tried a couple images where I instead processed for black and white. So the point of this video is I wanted to show you the color, but I also want to show you that you can interpret this without color and still be successful. So this was one of the other shots that I created where I had that slice of light down the middle of her face, and I just did really high contrast black and white. I wanted to show you what it looked like in camera again. So notice this looks quite similar to where we started in the other shot, right? So both of these images looking quite flat, lacking color. Then instead I did a really high contrast black and white. So I popped the contrast, I popped the whites, I increased the clarity, and then I cleaned up the edges again and also extended a little bit of the blur of the dress. And so I was able to get this really clean, crisp black and white. So let me know in the comments which one you like better. Did you like the colorful interpretation? Did you think the black and white was maybe a little bit more painterly, a little bit more timeless? Which one are you leaning towards and why? Let me know, because I like both of these and I'm honestly not sure what direction to go. So what I hope you've taken away from this video is that post-production can definitely be part of your vision. It's part of the creative process, and you can take things completely different directions. And one of the things I hope you consider in the future is playing around with creative white balance and tint. Now, if you liked this creative technique, be sure to give me some love, and I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe. But if you want to learn more about my creative techniques, I recommend you visit learnwithlindsay.com. I have a ton of tutorials, everything from how to use color gel photography, as well as post-processing techniques and creative studio lighting. So you're definitely going to want to check that out. And if you want to see the gear used in the making of this particular video and this particular image, be sure to check out the links in the description below or visit adorama.com. I hope you've enjoyed. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time.